We're going to talk about the economy and real estate, and to help me do it, I'm going to talk about science fiction to help us frame the whole discussion. And why am I using science fiction as my framing device? Well, because I've been watching a lot of movies recently, and it seems as though a lot of these science fiction pictures have 2022 as the year, well, that the world ends. So here's one movie, The Purge, Nation Reborn, killing everybody. Another movie, 2022, Planet Earth. This is just a prison with just one rule, survival of the fittest, pretty grim. And then my favorite of the three, a Charlton Heston classic, Soylent Green. Nothing runs anymore, nothing works, but the people are the same. By the way, the tagline in this one is, they're eating people. Who else has seen this movie? Just me? But the good news is, I ain't that guy. I am optimistic about 2022 and beyond, and I'm going to tell you why. And I'm going to make 6 predictions about where we are and where we're going to help me along the way. These are my predictions. Number 1, we're going to have strong growth for the next couple of years. Number 2, low inflation. Let me say that one more time, because I was in a breakfast meeting today and some guy says, oh no, inflation. Not me, man. And I'm going to tell you why I don't fear inflation. Number 3, The Office. Not dead by a long shot. Number 4, industrial and multifamily may be the land of milk and honey, but are there some chinks in the armor? Number 5, everybody's least favorite asset class, retail. Its time has come. And then the last one, you're going to love this. Don't worry, be happy. We'll talk about all of them in just a moment. Strong growth. You know what last year was like? It was like that. That's my most complicated chart in today's presentation. It was a miracle. The amount of growth we had, the amount of sales in commercial real estate, but was it really a miracle? When you pump more money into the U.S. economy than you did during all of World War II, that ain't no miracle. That's math. And we predicted that the economy was going to grow as the rate it did. We even predicted that the commercial real estate market was going to explode like it did. Unbelievable. Money changes everything. Cyndi Lauper, by the way, for those people who don't know that song. Money changes everything. And it changes it from a macro perspective, and it changes it from a micro. And the micro perspective in commercial real estate is there is more money coming into commercial real estate today than ever before. When I got into this business 25 years ago, about 4% of institutional capital went to real estate. Now it's closer to 14. And now we have all private investors, many of whom are in this room investing as well. The weight of money is the single most important factor in all of real estate. More important than fundamentals. And what does it do? It drives down prices, drives down cap rates. This is no shock to everybody. Every asset class is seeing cap rate compression with the possible exception of retail. Look nice and flat. That's why I see opportunity. Hit it where they ain't. Shoeless Joe Jackson. Where's the economy going? Well, you take a look at the world economy in 2021-22, pretty damn good, 4%. Next year, growing to 3 to 4%. Very, very good. Why? Macro stimulus and what my good friend in Taipei, Henry Chin, calls revenge retail. Consumers got a ton of cash in their pockets, and they want to spend it in restaurants, in fancy clothing stores, in cool hotels like this. The consumer is 2/3 of the American economy. Don't underestimate that. One thing you should be thinking about is this, though. A lot of economists say, oh, the cycle reset. We got another 5-6 years to run. So even though I'm Mr. Good News up here today, I'm here to tell you I don't think the cycle reset. I think that the cycle is now back largely to where it was pre-COVID, which means we'll have another couple good years of run, but we're not going to have 7 years of the land of milk and honey because of this. Inflation. Willy Wonka. Come on, people. I got to get some new movies in my presentations. Everybody's worried about inflation, but I am not. And why is that? Now, if I was Milton Friedman, I'd say the only thing that matters is the money supply. Or if I was a modern monetary theorist, I'd say, don't worry about that anyways. But you know what I am? I'm a guy who looks at the numbers. And the numbers are this, is that we are going to have bad inflation over the next year, but then it is going to drop and fall off and get back to normalized rates with respect to goods. When you look at inflation, you got to break it into two parts, goods and services. Services are things like healthcare cost of higher education. Goods are stuff. This little TV set right here, moved into my house 15 years ago. That TV set cost me $8 grand. You know what that TV set costs today? About $700, and thank you very much to the world's best conference for giving me one as a party gift. But we have seen some crazy inflation right now, and we got to see it get lower. But the real reason why it's going to get lower is because I'm in the camp where it's the supply chain that's mucking up the goods coming into the country. But there's some crazy things happening today. One of them is used cars. Folks, I've got every early 1970s and 80s movie reference. I just brought in my fantastic 2018 Jeep Grand Cherokee because it was coming off lease with 30,000 miles over my lease contract. I was ready to write them a check for $6 grand. I walked out of there with a check from them for $2,500. That's how crazy the supply shortage is today, showing up in things like used car. But things are going to get better. And things are going to get better because we're going to improve the supply chain. A lot of the excess capital that's in consumers' pockets is going to slow down. But in a couple of years, the economy is going to slow down. But we're going to see a material change to the economy over the next couple of years, which might be somewhat inflationary, but it's going to be a good thing. And that's going to be a rise of regionalism and a modest decline in globalism. I don't have to tell you some of the tensions we're seeing with China, problems over in Europe. And when I'm speaking to my colleague in Taipei, he says, well, you know what we're going to see? We're going to see a +1 strategy. We're going to call it the VIP strategy. I said, well, Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, that sounds pretty good. But I believe in the Big Mac, Mexico, America, and Canada. And why do I believe in the Big Mac over VIP when it comes to the manufacture of goods in the future? Because the average laborer in Mexico makes 10% of the average laborer in the U.S. Because Canada has 5 times the amount of skilled immigration of the U.S. on a percentage basis. You put those things together, that Big Mac starts to look a lot more tasty than the VIP line. You want to hear more about it? Here it is.
Every indicator that we look at right now states that the labour market is continuing strong. In fact, it's so strong that it's a bit of a problem. There are a vast amount of jobs out there and not enough workers at the moment willing to fill those jobs. That's creating supply constraints. It's creating a little bit of wage inflation.
Labor is the issue. We're running out of it. We're running out of it because of no immigration. The birth rate just went below replacement rate. The Great Resignation, retirement, among other things. And by the way, I can't believe it took me 9 minutes into a preso to shamelessly plug my podcast, The Weekly Take. Please listen to that too. But am I worried? What me worry? Mad Magazine, man, I am older than like everybody in this room. I'm not worried at all, even if I'm wrong on inflation, and this is why. Because I'm in the commercial real estate business. And commercial real estate values are positively correlated with inflation in all asset classes. Now, hyperinflation is bad. The 13% number that was quoted before, that's not going to happen. But modest inflation is a good thing. As Thomas Jefferson said, a little revolution every now and then is a good thing. A little inflation every now and then is a good thing too, because I got bad news for all you debt to GDP people out there. Our national debt, which is now $30 trillion, we're never going to repay it. We can't. All we can do is make it a smaller percentage of our economy. So that's been the way since the beginning of time, so don't hold your breath. But here is what you really need to worry about. Because I am the guy up here talking about how things are going to be real good the next couple of years, and they are going to be real good. But the next couple of years, here's my forecast for 2024. Do you guys get that chart? Does that image kind of bring it home? Because in 2024, we are going to see the end of the stimulus, the end of the excess demand, the end of the supply chain problem, and we're going to see growth revert to pre-COVID levels. In addition to that, interest rates, which are likely to spike in the next year by about 50 to 100 basis points, certainly at the short end of the curve, but at the long end of the curve, we expect the 10-year Treasury to top out at around 2.6%. It's going to start to go down again in 24 as growth slows down. So all of you budding real estate superstars in this room are buying assets for the long term. And if you're underwriting anything beyond 3 to 5 years, do not say, oh, inflation's so high today, I've got to raise my exit cap rate. Don't do it, because cap rates and interest rates in the future are going to look more like they are today than they are something much more draconian with hyperinflation and interest rates spiking into the 3 or 4% range on a 10-year. Not going to happen. Office. Well, there ain't no sector in real estate that's gotten more attention than office. Let me show you a little video which describes what's happening in the office space right now.
Steve Austin, astronaut, a man barely alive. Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology. We have the capability to make the world's first bionic man.
Well, that about sums up the office space, doesn't it? Crashed and burned, but we are rebuilding it. All right, how many people remember the $6 Million Man? I had one of those little toys where you could look through his eye and see forever. But the office is sort of like the Matrix. Are you taking the red pill or are you taking the blue pill? Is it like the past or is it like something different? Well, the good news, it's coming back. But I'm taking the pill that has me talk about the future, because I think the future is different and the future of office is bright. But it's going to change. And how is it going to change? It's going to change in a couple of ways. Who's going to be in the office? And why are you going to be in the office? If you got a task, client-facing, collaboration, you're in. Solo work, not. Another thing you need to think about, employer-driven. How are you going to design the office differently in order to get people to go there? People are going to have to want to go to the office, not need. And then you have to take into consideration employee-driven. Do I want to be getting FaceTime with the boss? Folks, there's a new word out there. It's called presenteeism. I don't even know if it's a word. But the word really means people in the office get treated like people who are not in the office. How long has that been going on? Since the beginning of time. Now with the rise of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, that may have to change. But nevertheless, that has been a fact of life since the beginning. Folks, what we're seeing in office today is not a real estate issue. It's a labor versus management issue. Here comes another shameless plug. My alma mater, the Cornell School of Industrial and Labor Relations. What did I study there? Labor. And sometimes labor has more power. Sometimes management has more power. It depends on a lot of factors. And what happened when we learned about labor in the early 1980s, there were two things about labor that were wrong. We were told that labor has perfect information and perfect mobility. Wrong and wrong. But when do they have perfect information and perfect mobility? Today. And how do I know this is a labor versus management thing? Do you guys know which industry is downsizing the fastest in terms of their footprint? Law firms. You know why? There is no employee on the planet that is more politically aware than young lawyers. And they are demanding hybrid work. May be good for them today, but I'm not so sure it'll be good for them for the long term. So when you're analyzing the future office needs, you have to look at what the person does. So let's assume for the moment you're a bounty hunter, like Deckard. Last time I checked, bounty hunters don't find a lot of their bounty sitting on the couch. You're going to have to be out in the field. This is a guy who's not going back to the office. But then again, if you're like Ripley, and you have to go out and save the world from alien invasion, occasionally you got to go back to the office to get the machines and the guns to go kill the bad guys. But then again, if you're Lando Calrissian, and you are the mayor of Cloud City, you want people back in the office today, because that is the only way the big cities are going to come back. Mayor of New York just said, we want everybody back in the office. You have to look at the job function, the task, even the demographics of the average employee to determine who's coming back. What does the city of the future look like? Does it look like central business districts around the world? Or is it something else? I'm going to give you my new favorite term. The office used to be all about the CBD, Central Business District. It's now about the BBD, Better Business District, and I stole that term from a client of mine called Highwoods Properties, a big southeastern REIT. And we'll talk about that in a moment, but the office is going to be transformed. What is the new A office? The new A office is one that has new A amenities, and it ain't just having a gym or a cafeteria. It's being healthy. Second shameless plug for my podcast.
We followed office workers around the world for an entire year, over 300 workers, and we tested them multiple times at their desk, simultaneously measuring air quality at their desk and cognitive function. Well, it turns out we see the benefit every time you improve the ventilation rate. There's no threshold, there's no magical cutoff. So it tells us, importantly, that even the good buildings have room to improve.
Abby Hoffman had a book from the late 1960s that said, "Steal this book." I'm telling you to read this book, in addition to the book of the great author who was just up here a moment ago. Because this book got to the holy grail of real estate. What is the holy grail? When I speak to the biggest occupiers in the world, and I represent the biggest occupiers in the world, they are most concerned about cost, about efficiency. And you know why? Because you can measure that stuff. You know why they don't talk about productivity like Joe Allen and his partner John McCumber? Because you can't measure it. But what did they do in this book? They measured the productivity gains from having a healthier building, having higher cognitive function, the holy grail. And to quote, shameless plug, my second alma mater, Harvard Business Review says, quote, "Great companies focus on productivity. They do not focus on cost." Read that book. But here's the problem about cost. Costs are skyrocketing right now. CapEx, the cost of actually building out space, it's going bonkers. Cost of building a new building, going bonkers. But on CNBC the other day, I was asked, when should you start building? Today? Or a year from now, when costs start coming down? Build today. Why? Because yes, costs are going to come down in a year, but labor costs might not come down, and the cost of capital is going to be 100 basis points higher in a year. So whatever you gain from having cheaper asphalt, cheaper steel, cheaper wood, you're going to lose it in other things. Now, remember when I talked about CBD versus BBD? Let me show you what a BBD looks like. This is a BBD in Pittsburgh called Bakery Square, and you might see the little Google sign back there near Carnegie Mellon University. Here's me in Los Angeles, in West Side, near UCLA, alma mater, over there, and Google just took that building. This is me in Midtown Atlanta, near Georgia Tech. Microsoft just took the building next door. What is the trend here, folks? People moving to these places that used to be the worst part of town and is now the best part of town, not just because it's hip and cool, because they have the 5 elements of awesome: talent, infrastructure, capital, live, work, play. I guess that was 4. That was my Rick Perry moment. But the point is, you see this not just in the United States, you see it everywhere. Here's another one in Chicago, the Fulton Market. You see it in Helsinki, where people are moving from downtown Helsinki to hipster areas like this. You see it in Paris, where people are moving from downtown Paris to La Défense district just north of town. Why do they like La Defense District? If you've ever been to Paris, it's very similar to DC, and why? Height restrictions. No height restrictions in La Defense District. So you have to think about the ability to bring in high volumes of people in addition to what is going to be a great place. Now, the single biggest debate I'm having right now in real estate is the future of CBD. Some of my clients are the biggest owners of office buildings in the world. One of my clients owns the Sears Tower, now known as Willis Tower in Chicago. She is putting $500 million in CapEx into one building, and they hope that it will stay relevant. That's the fear factor right now in CBDs versus BBDs. But these are BBDs. If you want to take a quick look at that, you'll find them in your city, and they're all the same. They all have the same characteristics of live, work, play, infrastructure, talent, capital, all of them. But one of the things that I like the most about the big cities is that they are constantly evolving. So I was having a debate with Sam Zell the other day, one of the great luminaries of our business, a billionaire started with nothing. He believes the cities are going to come back. Shameless plug, number 3 for my podcast.
Well, I'm only almost 80 years old, and so I only have the benefit of maybe 5 or 6 times dealing with the prediction that New York was done for. And I never believed any of those, and I don't believe it now.
So I was having a funny debate with Sam off camera. And I said, Sam, I was just in Des Moines, Iowa, and I went to the Iowa State Fair, and they had butter animals there, and they're making them out into like Sesame Street characters and cows and all kinds of cool stuff. He says, you can keep your butter animals. I'm going to Midtown Manhattan. So that's my Sam Zell story. Operational real estate. What is operational real estate versus other real estate? Real estate is the 4 big food groups: office, industrial, multifamily, and retail. Operational is everything else. It includes data centers, life sciences, self-storage, senior housing, student housing. And what have we been seeing in the last year? Well, operational real estate's gotten real popular. How popular? This popular. Those are the investors in operational real estate, searching for yield. And what happened because of that? Cap rates have gotten to record levels. Should they? They don't call it operational real estate for want of a name. They call it because you actually have to operate it. It's actually a business. I'm not saying we're sitting around with office buildings aren't a business, but they are so popular, they've drove yields down, because yield is the scarcest thing in the world for commercial real estate investors other than large pockets of talent. Those are the 2 scarcest things out there. Now, what did I say before about office? A lot of the investors left office. Folks, that causes a skew in the market. Why? Because office is the largest, by far, asset class in real estate. In fact, even though that clip before was the $6 million man, I could have called it the $17 trillion problem. All this money moved, and all this money went into operational real estate and drove prices down. Will those prices stay high once we're out of the pandemic? Life sciences sounds really cool, and it saved the world. Okay, we'll give it that. But most of the tenants that go into life sciences have no credit. Are we building too much of that stuff? Well, there isn't that much of it today. It's only about 200 million square feet. But at the moment, you have to think about the downside of operational real estate, why it's so popular like that. That is the spike we saw at capital coming in to the space. Let me give you another thing to consider. Did you know that data centers, which is another one of those hot sub-asset classes, uses more power than all of the UK combined? And so you know what's becoming the hot new thing in energy? Boy, this is going to get me tossed from this room. Yep, I said it. Nuclear power is making a comeback. I got one fan, and he saw the $6 million man too. I saw him nodding his head. Not just me, folks, not just the crazy guy on stage. Bill Gates supports this as well. But we're not talking about the old school nuclear power plants. We're talking about the new school stuff. And the new school stuff looks like this. They use a footprint that is 1/10 the size of old school nuclear power. And here we go. Here is the really holy grail that I thought was never, ever, ever, ever possible. Cold fusion. 3 weeks ago, an experiment in Europe was able to contain cold fusion for 5 seconds. Doesn't sound like a lot, right? Cold fusion is the thing that powers the sun. And you know what its after stuff is? Water. It's coming. Cheap nuclear energy, and it ain't crazy talk. Eventually, we'll get to the point where we can get almost 1.31 gigawatts to go into the future. See, it's a little bit newer movie, 1983. Come on, people, work with me. Industrial and multifamily. Boy, I got a complicated chart on this one, too. That about sums up industrial and multifamily in one slide. The land of milk and honey. Could things possibly get any better? Last year, we saw 20%, yes, 20% plus growth in industrial, and many markets, 20% growth plus in multifamily. And we've seen record low cap rates. I've even seen a few with a 2-handle. Lowest I've ever seen. Now, let's look at industrial for a second. Industrial is the land of milk and honey, but what are the issues we're looking at right now? We're seeing e-commerce going up, more just in case, which really means more inventory storage. That's why we're seeing more demand. And then we're seeing a shift of the type of industrial, where it's located, to so-called last mile. And many of these last mile locations and high-density locations, like Seattle, like New York, are getting rents that are higher than the local office rents. It's pretty good in the industrial space right now. It's pretty good in the multifamily space, too. And why is it good in multifamily? Shortage. Houses are forming, and the economy is good. Now, a lot of these houses that are forming are moving not just into multifamily. The actual hottest asset class in commercial real estate today is single-family rental. Did you know there are more single-family rental units than there are multifamily rental units? Who knew? But here's the thing. Trees don't go to the sky, and I'm getting more of my big investors taking the opposite side of some of these bets, saying, well, maybe it's a little bit too good in these spaces. Which reminds me of the movie Logan's Run, which was the land of milk and honey, where you can do anything, but you had to kill yourself when you were 30. So in any event, you just have to look at these things objectively and say, what is the upside potential versus the downside risk? And there ain't no asset class in real estate that doesn't have both. And speaking of showing that risk, let's talk retail for a moment, shall we? Oh boy. Want to see what happened to retail over the last 10 years? You're going to love this chart. That about sums up what happened to retail over the last 10 years. Pretty rough stuff. The end of the world, the end of the B mall, the end of secondary market retail. But you know what retail looks like today? Looks like that. This is a movie from the early 1980s, but if you look carefully, you see a plane sitting in a house. You know what that scene was? It was Robin Williams talking to his wife. And while they're inspecting this house, a plane comes overhead and crashes into the house. And Robin Williams goes to his wife and goes, honey, we'll buy this house because we'll be safe here. That's what retail is today. Retail had its disaster. They've cleaned up most of the mess. They have adapted, reused much of the stuff into industrial and other uses. And I think right now, there's more upside potential there than any place else. Non-grocery anchored open air retail. You want to know why? First, let me show you something really scary.
Hey, you want to see something really scary?
You bet.
This is the chart of internet penetration post-COVID. You saw a little spike after COVID, and then what did you see? Internet penetration flattening out. If you're an industrial owner, if that doesn't scare you, I can't scare you. Now, our charts do show that we think internet penetration is going to go back to trend, but it might not. You don't know. And if it flattens out, retail is going to look a whole lot better, and it is alive. I like science fiction movies, sorry. It is alive if you take a look at retail sales. It's alive if you take a look at the savings rate. And it's alive if you look at it particularly for sales within bricks and mortar, doing incredibly well because of this revenge retail thing. But what's an area that I'm not that keen on at the moment? Grocery. This is not science fiction. This is the movie Animal House, folks. They went to Food King, stole some food. Oh boy, I got to get new movies. Why am I not so keen on grocery? I'll tell you why. Because internet penetration is only just beginning there. Now, Amazon has had some real problems with internet penetration in grocery with their Whole Foods and their Amazon Prime thing, or Amazon Fresh thing. But the delta between open-air retail and grocery-anchored retail cap rates is about 200 basis points. I don't know you can justify that if we begin to see much more penetration of the grocery space by the internet. Now, let me tell you a funny story. So you guys remember during the beginning of COVID, like from March through like June of 2020, there was no professional sports on TV. Remember that? Well, when I had a shortage, I got into something else. I got into horse racing. And it was the only thing on TV. And I started gambling on horse racing, and boy, was I terrible. I mean, I didn't win, lost money. I said, but you know what? I'm a really smart guy, and how come I keep losing? So I got so good at horse racing that I could underwrite every race almost to the letter, the penny, of how the morning line would do it. I could underwrite it perfectly, and I was still losing. And then I decided to go wonky on it. And I read all the academic research on horse racing. The beauty of horse racing, as opposed to commercial real estate, is the data in horse racing is really, really good. The data in commercial real estate is really, really spotty. It's really bad. But what did it teach me? It taught me why people were leaving retail. They were leaving retail because there's a fear factor that goes into betting that happens at the moment of truth when you walk in to make your bet. This is how betting lines work, getting up closer to post time. I could talk to you more about this academically, but what this chart proves to me is that retail is spectacularly oversold, and it's done so for emotional reasons, just like betting at the window in horse racing. And I could show you charts that will defend this position further. Open air, non-grocery anchored retail, and institutional investors are scared to death of it. That is your opportunity. Hit it where they ain't.
Don't worry, be happy. Don't worry, be happy.
Pretty scary to talk about don't worry, be happy, given all the challenges we see in the world today, right? Well, somehow I made it through that rain. Let's talk about some of these challenges in the world and why I'm still optimistic about the future. Well, first of all, China risks a hard landing because their real estate problem over there is a lot worse than it's reported in the press. But here's the good news about China. China's debt to GDP ratio is 70%. Ours is 110%. They have a lot of dry powder to fill the gap to get them out of the problem. So I'm not worried about the China problem. I'm not worried about what's happening in Canada either. COVID crisis is getting better. Some of these same places that basically instituted forms of martial law are now loosening restrictions. I think that is getting better as well. And yes, the biggest problem of the day, Ukraine. Ugly, ugly story. Terrible humanitarian issue, terrible crisis. That's the bad news. I'm in the real estate business. I'm the economist guy. We have studied events going back 50 years, and here's the deal. The deal is this. Geopolitical events do not have any impact on growth or jobs over any length of time. I don't know if you guys saw the stock market the last 2 days. After it had its freak out, it's now bouncing back hard. So yes, terrible humanitarian crisis, but it ain't going to affect the growth of the U.S. economy. Now, what are some of the other challenges we're seeing? We're seeing Republicans fight Democrats. Things are getting pretty rough around here. Am I worried about that? Nope. Yeah, it's pretty dark, but it was pretty dark in the late 1960s too, and we somehow made it through that rain. But you know what makes me really optimistic? I'm going to tell you a story. When my grandmother used to send my father swimming in the 1940s and 50s, sending him to a lake or to a river, she did so with terror. She was terrified to send them there. You know why? Polio. And then some guy came around and invented the polio vaccine. You know how long it took Jonas Salk to develop the polio vaccine? 25 years. Do you know how long it took us to develop the vaccines that may have saved the world? 9 months. Now, I'm not going to be pro-vax, anti-vax. I'm just saying that it happened, and it happened here. It happened here in America. And that was no accident that it happened here and it didn't happen in Europe, it didn't happen in China. Because there's something about this place that's more than capitalism. It's more than innovation. It is we pull up our bootstraps when the going gets tough and we get going. So notwithstanding the challenges we have right now, I've never been more optimistic about the future of America. Now, some people will say, oh, look at the crime problem. Look how bad that is. Folks, it ain't nearly as bad as it was in the early 1990s, and it's largely because there are voids in city centers. No people, bad elements come in. Once people come back, those things will change. Very optimistic about that. But I'm also optimistic because there's been an enormous rise in the focus on the E, environmental, in the ESG category, environmental social governance, and we're seeing new forms of power. Some old school, hydroelectric, but we're seeing a huge spike in things like solar panels. Yes, I believe in nuclear, but I also believe in solar and wind and other forms of energy because that is what investors demand. And who's driving this? It's investors from Europe because they have to comply with the UN principles on responsible investing. They are demanding it for everything they buy in the U.S. So if you're buying stuff in the U.S., I'm not telling you to go green. What I am telling you is that if you don't go green, you ain't getting an investor from Europe. It is as simple as that. So you have to think about capital flows when you're doing your investments. And this is what, yes, another shameless plug for my podcast was said about solar panels.
We seek to originate, place solar arrays on commercial rooftops and in commercial parking lots, and then sell the power that we make from those solar arrays at a discount back into the buildings that we're sitting on top of or next to. Commercial real estate, of course, is one of the largest emitters of carbon. About 40% of carbon dioxide emitted last year came from buildings, and our intention was from the beginning to turn that around and actually have commercial real estate be a generator of clean energy instead of emitter.
That, of course, was Lars Norell, better known to you as the drummer from Metallica. That's actually Lars Ulrich, but I mix the two of them up all the time. But in any event, here are my final thoughts on today's prezo. I am optimistic about the macro and the micro for the reasons I laid out. And just to remind you what they were, I believe we're going to have strong growth for the next couple of years, but we're going to get tough in 2024. I believe in low inflation, not just for longer, forever, because of macro factors like an aging demographic, too much cheap money, too much cheap labor, and then innovation itself is deflationary. I think the office will survive, but I think it's going to be a new BBD neighborhoods. I think industrial multifamily are great, and they will stay great for a few years, but you do need to think about the downside. I think retail's time has come, given how bad it's been, and don't worry about some of the big geopolitical issues because they'll have no impact on your investing. But you know what, folks? I lost one of my heroes about 4 weeks ago. His name was Meatloaf. And Mr. Loaf, in addition to being in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, where I started today's presentation, was also in Fight Club. He was great in that movie, too. But why am I inspired by the great Meatloaf? Because I just made 6 predictions, and I ain't going to get them all right. But inspired by Meatloaf, I hope that 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Now don't be sad. Don't be sad. 'Cause 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
I now want to invite up here one of my dear friends in the industry, Vicki Schiff, who's your next speaker. And we're going to talk for just a minute or two before Vicki gets into her presentation. Vicki, thank you for joining me on stage.
Okay, first of all, how many people in this room are over 50? Raise your hand. Okay, that's how many people understood your movie references, first of all. What about House of Gucci? I'm sure you could find something in there. Ready Player One, maybe Game of Thrones, which is a little older. You can, get some new references.
Well, I live in the early 70s and 80s.
I know. It's
So Vicki,
you gotta
and
understand this.
she'll be modest, but is one of the great thinkers in debt and structured finance in the world. And so she's going to give you some great stuff in a couple of minutes. So Vicki, I just talked about the biggest issue of all, which is inflation.
Yes.
And I said, I'm not worried about it at all. I think it's going to be a short-term thing going to happen. Obviously, that impacts your cost of debt more than anything else. Do you agree with me?
Well, he talked about in immigration, right? And he talked about labor costs. It's something we need to think deeply about and I'm on the board of a public company in Canada. The amount of foreign workers and talented people that we have in that company is tenfold of what I see in companies in the US. So regardless of what you think, we need to bring talented workers into this country. So I think if we can solve that politically, maybe we can curb the talent and labor inflation problem.
Well, that speaks directly to my Big Mac analogy.
That's right.
Do you like Big Macs, by the way? Quarter pounder with cheese?
I'm a vegetarian. I might need to leave now. I might need to leave this room now. But my favorite author is Ayn Rand, so.
Yeah, I can assure you that if you ever quit vegetarianism, Big Mac might be your first choice.
Okay, but I probably wouldn't do the McDonald's. I'd have to do something more quality. But anyway,
Hey, thank you very much, Vicki.
absolutely love always listening to Spence. He's amazing, entertaining, and a dear friend. And I want to be on your podcast at some point.
You're next. Take it away,
All right.
Vicki.